So for the past 9 years, I have readily admitted to you that we're broken. We're car guys and car gals, and we get deep into the weeds of the minutia of the car world, where a bean counter or someone from the DMV would look at this and say it's a two-seat, two-door convertible. You and I see this as elegant design from a time gone by, but it's a GT. Now in the previous episode, I showed you something that is related to this, kinda has a history towards this, but it goes in a completely different direction and has a completely different focus. But now we have to justify in today's day and age that the same bean counter or that same person from the DMV would look at this car and the one I showed you in the previous episode as they're both two-door, two-seat convertibles. Why do you need both? Well, today we need to find out why we do indeed need both. Okay, so before we get too far down the road here, huge point of clarification. We are not driving an AMG GT Roadster. Instead, despite what your eyes are telling you, we are driving an AMG GT C Roadster. There is a rather sizable difference, about 70 horsepower, if you remember from the tech review. So let's put our foot into it. Got a nice turn here with a beautiful elevation change, perfect for 70 extra horsepower. Put our foot into it in comfort mode, and not exactly a slouch, now is it? But then again, we've driven this engine many times before, and not just in cars from Stuttgart. Now, you know what? Let's go into my home brew mode, which is individual. Okay, now I'm going to forewarn you, you're going to hear something pretty magical in this mode. So let's put our foot into it. Again, a nice turn, but a beautiful elevation change coming. Come around this turn here, and let's come out of it with some power. Oh, God, it sounds so much better in this mode. And imagine driving around LA. I mean, it's like you strike fear in the hearts of small children when this thing goes by. But God, when they see it, they're like, Mommy, I want one of those. And it's that kind of a car, just as an aside from pulling power, really it's that kind of a car. And I'll admit, I didn't expect it before it turned up on my doorstep, but this burgundy, who would have thought burgundy on this? I mean, Batman should have a burgundy car after you look at this. Anyway, plenty of pulling power, even with the comfort mode once we've tightened up everything. Oh God, does that sound glorious. But now let's switch to the complete, like super duper full fat mode of race. That means everything is on like the most ridiculous setting. Another turn, another elevation change. But we gotta remember something here. This has got about a 400 to 500 pound, oh, that sounds wonderful. About a 400 to 500 pound weight disadvantage over a 911, which really this is the direct competitor. And it's not a huge difference. If I'm honest, there's more than enough power that's come out of this engine. As a matter of fact, it worked beautifully in the heavier, bigger DB11. Oh God, it sounds better here, mainly because the top is down and the exhaust is closer to the back of your ear. I mean, people, I'm trying to be technical as much as I can here, but it puts a ridiculous smile on your face. Not to the point where you say, what 911, but it's like, oh, I like a different flavor of ice cream. Maybe I should try this more often. So I opened the previous episode, the tech review of this car, with a hell of a statement. Something to the effect of, we're at an inflection point in the 64-year history of the SL, and really, if we're honest, that's been a GT most of its life. A good one, but still a GT. But now that you have more data points on this, you see it has a very different focus in life, but there's still two more I have yet to share with you. Number one, in the GTC, it is fitted with adjustable engine mounts. So if you're familiar with Sport Chrono and a Porsche, it stiffens up the engine mounts, which stiffens up the chassis, improves the handling in either race or Sport Plus mode. Then the piece de resistance is the rear suspension. It's fitted with rear wheel steering. So it's up to 1.5 degrees of steering depending on the speed, the angle changes, whatever. But now, we know all this, all these data points. How does it impact not just the focus, but how this thing drives? Okay, for driving dynamics, you and I are going to stay in race mode to make this a bit more difficult on what I would call a significant challenger here. Because, yes, this is a 911 Challenger. However, it's set up completely different. So we are going to disturb the plane of motion. Let's put our foot into it, come around this nice sharper turn here. And is it neutral handling? No, but remember from the tech review where the engine is, it's really close to us here. So your eyes are somewhat fooled. You look at this car and you think you're driving Cruella de Vil's Coupe de Ville to go pick up 101 Dalmatians, but in reality you're not. You're sitting more in the back of the car, but the engine is right there with you. So you and the engine work together to make it somewhat balanced, but it's not totally balanced. So in other words, it's not like the perfection of a 911 Carrera or a 911 Turbo. Okay, so what's important to understand here as we go through some more technical turns coming up here, there is virtually flat handling once you get into the sport handling mode, which is race mode, sport plus, and in this case, individual that they've set up. And there's no squat downshifting. Oh my God, that sounds good as we downshift. There's no squat, no dive, no pitch, no roll. Now, once you get acclimated to really how different the setup is on this thing, meaning you got the longer wheelbase we talked about in the tech review, and the extra weight we just talked about previously, then you get acclimated to it. Then you stop relying on your eyes as to the way you think it's going to drive, and then all of a sudden, it's just as effective as a tool on these types of roads, and probably on a track, as the other cars in this segment. But God, it's almost a more rewarding experience because of those differences. It's kind of like, remember when Madonna first came on the scene and she had the space between her teeth? They're like, I don't like women with a space between their teeth. Then all of a sudden you're like, she starts singing and doing the dancing and all the different stuff she does. And now, fast forward, what? 40 years later, and everybody's still trying to follow her. Get it? So I did it again. I hoodwinked you. I didn't tell you absolutely everything about the AMG GT and the GTC Roadster. But now it's on a need-to-know basis, so you really need to know. What are some of the other differences between a GT and a GTC besides the output, the rear-wheel steer, some of the other stuff we talked about? Well, there's some interesting things. Number one, the whole throttle mapping, steering mapping, all that kind of stuff. There is a race mode in this. The dampers are adjustable in the GTC. The top, it turns out the fabric itself is lighter. Now, the folks at Mercedes, they didn't tell me how much lighter or what it's made of. They just said it's lighter. Nice touch. This one I feel is important, need to know. The Burmester stereo is fitted as standard on a GTC. And then, interestingly enough, the rear end, you're probably looking at this and saying, man, that thing looks sinister. And the reason why it looks sinister is because it's wider. It's 2.25 inches wider in a GTC because it's completely different sheet metal back there. So it's another one of these design tricks that we've talked about throughout these two episodes that you don't know until someone tells you. So now you know. Now, does that ever get old? I think not. But even so, let's go back to my home brew, the individual mode, and what we'll do is slow down and talk about a couple of notes. Now, I know in the tech review I waxed on poetically about the interior of this thing, just how exquisite it is. But there's a certain quality you don't get until you get into the daily usability of it, especially when you put somebody over there, and that is the width and how far that goes into the driving experience. And yeah, I'm sure it helps with the driving dynamics, but it's more in the perception as you sit behind the wheel and like, this is really a special place to be, because all of a sudden you're in this, like, I feel like I'm in a Southcheck bodied car from the 30s. It's that kind of experience. Once you add the width and layer it on top of the way the thing is screwed together, as we discussed in the tech review, then there's this whole setup again. I went on and on about this in the tech review, but this adds to the width. One usability note, for the life of me, I don't understand why I had to have this, the mode switch over here and the volume switch over here. Now granted, I'd love to sit here and tell you, yeah, you're gonna be doing this all the time, but I've driven this thing for almost, 7 days now, and I've used this only up here. I said it once and forgot it down in the city. So I would prefer to have this over here and the volume button over here. Think of that as an open letter to the folks in Stuttgart. Now there is one more important usability note, and it's kind of a riddle in that it has nothing to do with the interior, but you only notice it once you sit behind the wheel and drive this thing for the first time. Maybe I would say pilot it for the first time is a better way to give away the riddle. Now you think the answer would be visibility, you'd be wrong. It's the picture-perfect, stunning view out of the windshield. Let me clarify. You know I'm an av geek, but this, it's like being strapped to the wings of the Luftwaffe, looking down this long hood. Remember, it's like your eyes playing a trick on you in that you think this thing is going to drive a certain way and it drives a completely different way. Well, this is all about communicating with your heart as a car guy. Well, me as an av geek as well. But you look down the hood and it's got just a little bit of history in there with those like power bulges from a 300 SL. But man, oh man, it's like, yeah, there are cars that drive better and are faster, but I would argue the reason why someone would choose this, if they were to choose this, it's solely the view looking that way. Over the past 2 episodes, you and I have been on a journey. One of information, but now we're at the point where we need to separate things out into 2 different silos. The car itself and that inflection point we discussed at the beginning of the tech review. First, the car itself, and the elephant in the room is it as good as a 911? And the answer is somewhat complex, but it's somewhat straightforward. The 911 has been around for 56 years. Its entire purpose in life has been to be a sports car in those 56 years. This comes from a company that for 64 years has made an incredible GT car. Now comes a purpose-built sports car, now one with the roof lopped off, and I walked into this with somewhat low expectations, thinking that it's just its freshman effort, so it can't be that good. And I would argue it exceeds my expectations. Yes, the equation is totally different than a 911 or even an R8. The engine's in a different place, the suspension is set up differently, it looks differently, it does visual tricks to your eyes, but at the end of the day, it is equally as dynamic as a 911. I would argue equally as dynamic as an R8. Just a completely different interpretation of what dynamic driving is. Now let's put that aside. Get back to that inflection point. I want to say that there is room in this world for a purpose-built sports car that happens to be a 2-seat convertible and a GT car that happens to be a 2-seat convertible. But I feel in this world with bean counters hanging around, I don't know how these 2 things could exist, especially now that AMG is making a Panamera version of this car. Does that mean that there will be an SL version of this car? Maybe one that's a little bit softer. There's no other way to put this. I worry about the future there, which is why I brought up the question in the first place of an inflection point. So I'm going to turn this around to you guys and ask you a very straightforward business question. Is there room in today's day and age of the car world for a 2-seat convertible that is very sharp to sit alongside the same showroom as a GT 2-seat convertible? Let me know why or why not, and justify your answer with a somewhat business case. You don't have to send me a spreadsheet, just why. Let me know in the comments below or via our social media, MotoManTV all in word, MotoManTV all in word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And with that, until I see you next time, bis später.